So we see the attendance numbers climb rapidly. There we go.
That's the plan.
That's the hope.
All right, folks. It's good to see folk arriving. Obviously, I will give folk a few minutes to join and to work out which buttons to press to enable audio. Good evening, folks. It's 5 p.m. Folk are starting to arrive. Glad to see you people here. I will, here we go. I see more folk arriving by the minute. I'll keep things static for another minute or two while folk come in. It's good to see you guys here already. Good stuff. I'm seeing a combination of names I've seen before and names that are new. So welcome, everyone. I see Alad's made a run for it, so we'll wait for him to return. It's okay, Alad, nobody noticed. We'll give it just one more minute. Let folk arrive, and then we'll kick off. All right, it's a couple of minutes after there, so I'll kick off. First and foremost, a very huge welcome. Thank you all for giving up a chunk of your Thursday evening to come and find out a bit more about FinOps and cloud cost management. This is actually the 8th, I can't quite believe it, the 8th in a series of Cloud Pathway events that we have run at Cloudsoft. The last few have obviously been remote as we've all struggled through lockdown and the usual pandemic, the new normal. But yeah, I'm delighted that you guys have joined us on this Thursday evening. We've got a good running order tonight. We've got some interesting speakers. There will be 3 talks. We have three presenters here whose cameras are on, in addition to my own. We have Alad, we have Ben, and we have Ashley, and they'll each be giving a talk, followed by a fireside chat, which is an opportunity for some Q&A. For your information, this session is currently being recorded and will be recorded. None of you are in the enviable position of being able to turn on your cameras or your microphones, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you. Please get involved, engage in the conversation, raise your questions in the chat window, and Charlotte or Kale or myself, we will try our best to moderate those questions and present them to the panel. Don't hold back, don't be shy. And also, after the event, if any of the subject matter has been interesting enough to spark a few ideas or maybe raise a few questions, you can, of course, follow up with us in person. We'd love to have follow-on conversations around the topics that we're going to discuss, and Cloudsoft will be offering initial chats that you can have for free with us to see if there's scope for us to help you further with your cost management initiatives. So yeah, there's some links on there on the screen. Follow Cloudsoft on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And without any further ado, I will introduce you to our panel. We have Ben Mora, who some of us may have come across before if we've done any FinOps training or FinOps instructor-led courses. We may have run into Ben. That's where I met him. Alad Sage is VP of Engineering at Cloudsoft, so he is kind of my boss, so I have to be polite to him. And we're also lucky enough to have Ashley, who works at Pearson in the capacity of Senior FinOps Manager. It's nice to see that these job titles now have FinOps as a recognized capability for the organization. So without any further ado, I think, Ben, you're at the top of the running order, I believe.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So I'll hand over to Ben. I'm also present on the slide, but I won't be speaking. I will be chairing the fireside chat at the end. But for now, sit back, make yourselves comfortable. I hope you have a beverage, a post-5 o'clock beverage, and I will hand over to Ben.
Thanks, Alasdair. I'm going to share my screen and put some slides up in on this to support my conversation. I'm about to just cover a very brief introduction to cloud cost management over 10 minutes. This is normally about a 90-minute minimum presentation, including a discussion and a couple of activities for the FinOps Foundation practitioner course that I was teaching yesterday, the day before. So to condense that into 10 minutes is sort of a stiff ask, so I'll do my best. I will try and encapsulate the key messages which need to be communicated. So, yeah, welcome to Cloud Cost Management. Here's kind of why we're here, really. Yeah, DevOps and cloud in general, public cloud in general, has kind of completely destroyed the traditional procurement flows. They don't work anymore. And when you try to reverse engineer them so that they do, all sorts of interesting problems can happen. But effectively, engineers are now able to spend company money blindly, almost at will, constantly. A couple of lines of Terraform, you spin up an EC2 instance, you spin up a Google Compute Engine instance or whatever it's going to be, and you basically start spending money. The very latest reInvent from AWS, you can now spend money at the rate of every millisecond because the Lambda functions can now bill per millisecond as of last reInvent. So yeah, you will start spending money immediately, and will continue spending so. And the engineers are the only people that know that they've started doing that generally. So the cloud economy has grown significantly and very, very quickly over a very short space of time comparatively. So let's kind of go back to before the cloud, while we had data center centric IT. Very, very standard stuff. IT was treated as just as much as many other business assets. There was heavy capex, opex was driven down as low as it could possibly be, although space power cooling always drove that back up again within data centers. But effectively, we were trying to keep everything capex. And then we had the dot-com boom. We had born in the web companies. We had everybody needed a website, whether they were toothpaste or whatever else it was. Everybody needed a website in the dot-com boom, and that triggered the need for some more scalable hosting, some flexible on-demand compute, where people didn't want to have to wait to order a server that took 6 months to arrive, and so on and so forth. So Amazon brought out EC2, and the immediacy and availability of these sorts of things led to the rise, the kind of significant take up and rise and build of agile and DevOps and all the other awesome methodologies that we use to accelerate our innovation in our business today. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, really there was a huge tipping point a few years ago where suddenly just the cloud reached a level of maturity whereby it was no longer a sandbox project. It was no longer, we'll give this a go and see if it works. But we have businesses born in the cloud. We have businesses before 2018 born in the cloud, but we have businesses really starting to put significant, huge investment into building out entire infrastructure in cloud. Which completely flips the spending model. It's no longer CapEx weighted. It's now fully OpEx. It's pretty much, although you can, in some circumstances, capitalize your R&D cloud spend, that's a deeper conversation. But yeah, effectively, it is now all OpEx. Well, how much spend? Well, it says there on the right, that figure is slightly out of date now. I believe the latest estimate is closer to the $500 billion. That's a lot of money. By next year, that is the size of the public cloud market globally. Now, if you think about that amount of money being spent by engineers without any stopgaps, without any gates and controls, there's some things to think about there. So we talked a moment ago about the traditional technology consumption model, and this is effectively what it was, right? I'm sure that most people on the call will be familiar with this idea. So the engineering teams in general would be the requesters. They would go cap in hand to finance, to their exec leadership and say, I want to buy some more equipment. What we've got now is bursting at the seams, or we want to expand our capabilities and go to new services, build new things. We need kit. At which point finance would go and look at the coffers, and they'd say yay or nay. That purchase request would be blessed by those on high, would then be passed over to the procurement teams, who would cut the PO, cut the purchase order, send that over to the supplier, and so on and so on. Very predictable, very, very predictable. I have been in way too many conversations where I've needed to forecast 12 months or sometimes 18 months of data center spend, and you do basically capacity forecast. It's a fairly tried and trusted model, but those cycles are slow. They're slow even if you're buying kit from your own company. In the case of previous employment with Oracle, you're buying kit from your own company, and it still takes a month or two to arrive. It still takes a while to get it racked and stacked and cabled and pre-provisioned and all this other stuff before the dev teams can start playing with it and doing their cool stuff. There's a very high cost of failure associated with those long cycles as well. So on the one hand, yeah, it's predictable, that's great, and it's static and we know what's going on and we can kind of budget for that for the year. But if you change direction after you've spent that money, you can't unspend it often. Most of the time you can't spend it. Unspend it. That money has been spent. Those servers have been bought. You're then into that depreciation cycle. You have that kit. So if you decide to can a project after purchasing the hardware, you have to find another use for that hardware. You might not. So there's a very high cost of failure, and that's not taking into account all the other associated costs involved in deploying physical tin too. So because I work for a multimedia and entertainment company, I quite like quotes and movie quotes in particular. It's one of my favorite films. So with great power comes great responsibility. So I mentioned these engineers have great power to spend money at will, wantonly on cloud. This changes the dynamic drastically. And this is fundamentally the problem statement that we now have in front of us. DevOps engineers can execute at breakneck speed. DevOps engineers can operate unhindered by financial approval, by purchasing, by any of the other things. You can sit down, cut some code on Monday. By the time you reach the end of your day or by the end of your week, you can have a working product to ship out the door. That's amazing. That's the kind of innovation pace that we've never been able to see before in many parts of the industry. However, finance, they find out at the end of the month that the money's been spent when they see the invoice. And they go, wow, what happened? Right? Spend is dynamic. It fluctuates on not just a daily basis, but on an hourly basis, or like I said a minute ago, millisecond basis, right? Spend is highly dynamic. In my world, where we work with streaming platforms, if we stream a public event like I don't know, a Premier League football match, for example, on Peacock in the US, during a Premier League football match, the viewership, the load on that will spike like crazy. We'll see 500-600% growth in spike during that match, right? Okay, that's predictable because we know the football match is going to happen, but it's highly flexible, highly dynamic spend in terms of the load that occurs. It does also allow some pretty free agile experimentation. You know, you can spike in any piece of technology you want to spike into there and then and get on with it and discover some stuff. That does result in wasted spend, some wasted spend, right? Hopefully your engineers tidy up after themselves and turn stuff off in cloud when they finish their spike, and then there'll be less wasted spend. But because of this model, there is a lack of communication with other parts of the business. So finance is outside the loop. They don't know what's going on. Procurement is completely outside the loop. They don't know what's going on. Their job was previously to buy stuff. Now they don't, they're not involved in that conversation anymore when spinning up resources. So this presents a structural and a cultural problem for businesses to understand and overcome, to be able to kind of tame this monster and control this cloud animal that we've got here. So there's another movie quote from another movie I like. It's not about the money though. It's about the principles. Hangover Part 2. Cool film. It isn't about the money, okay? It is not about spending the minimum amount of money you can spend that on cloud. Because if you want to spend the minimum amount of money, turn it all off. Very cheap then, right? It is about the principles of getting the best value for every dollar that you spend on your cloud. You need to know what you're spending, why you're spending it, and whether you should have spent it at that point in time, right? And that requires some really different approaches to how your business handles its IT spending. So these are some principles that that the FinOps Foundation has put forward as being the key principles to adopt in order to ensure that your organization is maximizing its value from cloud and at making sure that we're being as transparent as we possibly can be in ensuring value in cloud. So I mentioned a minute ago about the lack of communication. That has to be addressed. You have to get teams to collaborate. Yeah. I'm actually going to be talking about a cultural shift soon in a different conversation, but basically it affects everybody in the organization, regardless of whether you're IT, whether you're finance, whether you're exec, whether you're PMO. It doesn't matter who you are in the organization. Cloud will change what you do to some extent. It will change how you do what you do. And it will also change the boundaries of your remit a lot of the time as well. So you need to understand what those changes are going to be and how you increase your collaboration across these different disciplines within the business so that everybody understands what's going on, why it's happening, why we're investing the money we're investing, and how that relates to the value that we're deriving from it. Speaking of value, business value of cloud must drive decisions. We must operate from a data-driven perspective. We must use data from what we have spent on cloud, what we've got from it, to drive future decisions about what we do with our cloud infrastructure, what we do with our service we have based on our infrastructure. It is all about driving maximum value from the cloud. I mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation that cloud usage and cloud deployment and engineering building stuff, that happens without really any controls. So you have to have ownership, right? I mentioned that quote from Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. Well, here's the responsibility. Engineers must be aware of the money that they are spending. They must be aware of the impact of their engineering decisions. It is just another metric. It's just as equal a metric as security, resilience, availability, all these things. Cloud spend is a key metric to deliver to the engineers who are causing that cloud spend, right? And that needs to be provided to them in reports that should be accessible and easily understandable and timely. It is a waste of time giving somebody data about March in May. You need to give people data about what happened yesterday, last week, what happened as a result of a weekend shutdown. Did we save money? Yes, we did. Brilliant. Let's take that forward and annualize that, right? These sorts of changes, these collaboration changes, the business value communications, the ownership, the reporting, the data, all this stuff, you have to centralize the way that you deliver that to your business. A centralized team positioned at a level that can drive these changes systemically throughout the whole business needs to drive this, because otherwise what you wind up with is chaos. You wind up with people talking in a completely different set of lexicon all across the business, viewing things in very different ways. You need to have a consistent approach to solving these challenges. And the final thing you need to do, and I'm kind of out of time, is that you take advantage of that variable cost model. I just mentioned that, shutting down things on the weekend and saving some money as a result. There's so many different things that you can do to cause a direct and immediate impact to your bill. You don't have to wait till the end of the month to see the difference you've just made. You can do it and then check the next day and see the difference immediately as soon as the billing data comes in. So take advantage of that variable cost model. You're not stuck spending money at that level. As soon as you discover an opportunity to save some money, you do it. You save the money, the change is immediate. That's a very powerful dial to be able to control within your business to understand how to manage your cloud investment and to control it better. So those are the 6 principles that the FinOps Foundation kind of puts forward and combines together to deliver a solution that helps to ensure that we can maximize value from cloud and get the most value from every dollar spent in cloud. So that's a 90-minute lesson broken down into 10 minutes. I think that was all right, actually.
I agree, Ben. That was great.
High speed.
What a fantastic 30,000-foot view of the problem and the core principles that underline the solution. So thank you for that. I consider the scene well and truly set, thanks to your 10 minutes. Fantastic. Again, I just want to encourage folk to engage in the conversation. Please don't be shy. Please keep some questions coming in. We can either answer them as we go, or we can save them up for the fireside chat, but please don't hold back. I'm sure that what Ben has described will be familiar to some of you and thought-provoking to others of you, and maybe some combination of both. I'm now going to hand over to Alasdair Hodge. He's going to talk about understanding, controlling, and reducing cloud costs. He's going to pick up where Ben left off. Over to you, Alasdair.
I think it's Ashley next, actually, isn't it?
Oh, I've got the running order wrong. Well, that's fine. I'm delighted to introduce Ashley, who will talk about FinOps from migration to operation.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ben, for setting the stage. So I'm Alasdair Hromatko. I'm out of the state, so I'm based in Iowa. So you guys are all having your afternoon drink, and I'm still on coffee over here. I've been with Pearson for about 7 years and really in the assessment industry for 12. Started as a technical project manager, and now I'm in charge of leading our FinOps team at scale at Pearson. Just kind of give you a scale of how big our team is. We have 10 members on the team that range from practitioners, analysts, engineers, and even a BI developer. So fairly large team here at Pearson. Pearson's traditionally been known as a textbook company, but we're so much more than that. We are leading the industry in online assessments. You can imagine with COVID how it's been with online assessments and courseware. We've had a very busy year, and we definitely need to be able to scale and scale up and down for our demand this last year. We are one of Amazon's largest public sector customers, so it gives you a little bit of scale of how big we are and our footprint inside of AWS. I was trying to think about what topic to go over, and FinOps covers so many things. We talk about forecasting and budgets and optimization, and some of those things are a little boring topics. So I figured I would jump more into like, how do we even get started to get FinOps involved with the beginning of a project, and get that right at the very beginning before you even build something inside of a cloud provider. You get that cost mindset built in. So I'm going to do my presentation about how FinOps is incorporated from migration to operation of an application. So to kind of give you guys a little backstory here, at Pearson, we had quick growth. I mean, our engineering staff doubled in 4 years. We went from 6 AWS accounts to 125. Today, we stand at 635 accounts. We went and migrated over 106 applications, mostly out of the data centers, doing lift and shift, tech upgrades, and we even started building our first cloud-first applications. We decommissioned 4 data centers. We're actually up to 10 data centers today, and our spend really went 3 times, increase over in 4 years. So a lot of growth quickly. We were moving very fast. What we found out is we had issues. We couldn't handle how much additional staff we needed. We found it harder to break down the bill, especially when we had products that were sharing AWS accounts. We didn't know how to prioritize one request from another. We would have these development teams coming to us and saying, I need to move my thing to the cloud. I'm told to move it to the cloud, but how did we know who to prioritize? We found out we would build something in AWS and there was no funding for it to be built there. And then it would get built there and people would expect like a typical data center team to just run it and keep it afloat. And that's not how we needed to operate in the cloud. And our stakeholders would experience sticker shock at the end of the month where they were actually being billed and charged for something that traditionally had been billed to our IT department. Anything the data center was just billed out to the IT department. So we had all of these kind of issues and we had to figure out how really to get a handle on it. So what we did is we created a gated process, which included our newly formed FinOps team, security team, and cloud governance team to be at the center of it. And that process kind of looks like this. We have an engagement process, which is usually a couple of days, where we figure out what is somebody asking us to do. We go through the definition phase. We figure out what needs to be moved, how many environments, what is it, a tech upgrade? Is it just a lift and shift? What are the risks associated with doing it? We commit to doing it. So we have our cloud team commit to it. We have our development teams commit to it. And we make sure our business commits to doing the move. We spend some time building it. And then finally, we launch it to be operational. I'm going to break down a little bit more of the meat inside of this process. So how our engagement process works today is we have a product owner somewhere in Pearson that says, I need to engage with our cloud and hosting team. So they notify one of our technical project managers. They fill out a form. It collects basic information. What department are you in? What are your milestones? When do you need to be moved by? What it was your product support? Who are your customers? Any type of security data that we need to be aware of. Once they filled out this form, we sit down and we have a definition meeting. And what we're trying to do is really create a statement of work. The goal of this meeting is to collect all of the requirements, make sure we truly understand, like, what are the dependencies, what are some security, like maybe we can only have data that resides in a Canada data center, which means we can only have a database admin that lives in Canada. So we have to go through all of those requirements. At this meeting, we have representatives from our engineering lead there, a security lead, a governance lead, and we also have a FinOps lead. So we're just really listening to whoever is that product owner, what they're trying to accomplish, and it's kind of firing back kind of questions and answers from there. Once we've gone through that definition phase, we do an internal meeting within our cloud and hosting team. And at this point, what we do is we say, do we have the flexibility? Should we move this to the cloud? Like, should it sit in the data center because maybe the product's going to be decommissioned or it's got too many dependencies on something in the data center? We usually push back if it's running on Oracle, or if we think it's going to be actually double the cost to move this, and then we have to decide, given it's double the cost, what are the cost reductions that we're going to bring? Like maybe we're going to reduce labor because of this. We go ahead and we create a solution diagram, and this is where we're taking all of our best practices that we want our development teams to be doing. We want them using serverless. We want them using, maybe managed services like RDS. We want them using Spot. We want them using release pipelines. We bring all of that best practices, so we're almost kind of stamping out these applications to be very similar. And the reason to do that is so that we can have an SRE team that maybe has 4 engineers or 5 engineers, and that SRE team has 5 different applications, and they're all stamped out very similar. We document any assumptions and risks, and then our FinOps team uses it to calculate actually what the infrastructure costs are going to be in year 1, year 3, 4, and 5, and provide also the labor costs for that. Once we've completed this meeting, we get back together. This is just kind of showing some of the tools that we use. So we use Cloudcroft, Lucidchart to document this stuff. We'll use the AWS calculator to estimate what it's going to cost. And these are kind of the output of what we bring back to our client or our product owner once we regroup with them. When we get back together with them, we go to this commit meeting. And so our cloud and hosting team really presents and proposes a solution. The security team talks about any risks and aversions, any proper documentation they need to fill out there. Our FinOps team will present associated costs, savings opportunities. We'll explain what RIs are and labor as well. So we might say, well, you're coming to us and you're asking for 3 pipelines with 4 dev environments. This is what the cost of a dev environment is going to be. Can we look at cutting one of those pipelines, or do you really need this dev environment, or can we have it running half time? So we're having a lot of these cost conversations up front, so that product owner knows going out the door, this is what the expected cost of running this thing is month to month, unless we cut some things out, or we look to move to Spot, or whatever the case is that we're recommending to them. So by the end of this meeting, or within a few days, both teams have committed to the timeline and resources. Both teams commit to certain responsibilities, like they're going to tag their resources. They're going to have guard duty running. They're going to have config rules running in their accounts. So there's no real surprises when they get their account and see these additional charges. And then we also both commit to what's going to be spent in AWS, and we make sure the business side has the funding to go ahead and build as well. So after the commit, we are ready to provide that team with some accounts. The way that we do things at Pearson here is we provide each product is going to get 3 accounts. They're going to get a production account, a non-production account, and a sandbox account. We always limit that sandbox account to $500 a month. So it's an area where they can have some of their engineers go in there and play and try some things and shut some things off. But if it gets over that amount, they're going to get their account shut down, or it gets suspended in that account because they've exceeded that limit. And then we asked them to build a non-prod and prod accounts. A couple of reasons for doing that, just security-wise, and then it just helps us know that every single product is in its own prod account, and that allows us to easily charge back, saying these accounts go to these cost centers. And it's a way that we've kind of gotten a little bit away from needing to be so dependent on tagging for charging back, but we use a lot of the tagging for drilling down on reporting. Our FinOps team also uses these to create budget alerts. So now that estimate that we've provided at the beginning and everybody agreed on, we're able to plug that into an automated system that sets up those budget alerts for that team. So whenever they go over it, they're going to get pinged on it. The other thing we do is we make sure all of these accounts are linked to our master account. So they're getting the EDP discount, any private pricing associated commit is being rolled up, and then they're using our shared savings plan and RI processes as well. This is an example of what a budget alert looks like if folks aren't familiar with that. So if you imagine all of our accounts have a budget alert. So when I was talking about we have 600 some accounts, we have at least that in budget alerts that get sent out to folks. We have some processes in place, like if somebody goes over that budget alert so many times, like three months in a row, we engage one of our FinOps analysts to figure out what's going on. How do we get them back on track? Really think about that. If you have a security alert go off or a security concern, you're not just ignoring it. You're going to engage with that engineering team and figure out how they're going to correct that security issue. Same thing. If we have a spending problem, we engage and try to figure out how we're going to fix it with them. Then we move into like the build out phase. And so, some degree our FinOps team is a little hands off here. So our developers and our cloud hosting engineers are building out infrastructure. Typically takes them 2 to 8 weeks to build out. During this time, our FinOps team is providing them, here's your actual spend versus what we forecasted, what we estimated together. If they're using the MAP 2.0 program, we're making sure they're tagging to get credits, and we're giving them reports on any untagged. So kind of going back to the principles that we discussed earlier, real-time reporting is being sent to them. We're not waiting until they've built the application 4 months out. We're getting that in real time to them. We also are establishing their accounts in our SaaS cost management tool so that that business owner can go in and see things. So they're not depending on us sending something. They can actively go in and get that data themselves. We're creating users in that SaaS platform. And then we do something where we do like an intro to FinOps presentation. So we sit down with the product owner, especially if they're new, and we'll train them on how to use Trusted Advisor, how to use our SaaS tooling, what our RIs are. We'll kind of tell them things to watch out for EC2 or RDS. We want to equip that product owner so they can go have conversations with engineers and feel confident that they can kind of be cost conscious with that engineer, if that makes sense. After build out, we stay with all these teams. And so our FinOps team has these analysts that are divided up between our business units, and they're responsible for going out and talking with the cloud vendors, making sure we're staying on our private pricing tracking. They're responsible with talking with finance team. Are we on track for actuals forecast? Hey, we're trending up. This is why we've doubled the customers, whatever the reason is. So we talk a lot with finance. We're reporting up to executives. I tend to see a lot of our executives want to make sure we have control over our cloud costs. So we're giving them the confidence that we've got the right guardrails, we've got the right governance in place, and we're hitting all the marks that we're expecting. Again, we're working with those business owners. We're really kind of giving them the lingo and the tooling so that they can go work with their engineers and keep the spend under control. And we spend the meat of our time with the SRE teams. We're working on creating cost optimization business cases with them. If any anomaly detection comes up, we're following up what's going on there, making sure they've got things properly tagged. We're contributing to any well-architected reviews they're doing. So that one FinOps person is kind of a little bit of a jack of all trades because they've got to be able to talk with the executives, the finance teams, but be in the meat of understanding what the engineers are building and working with them hand in hand. So this kind of leave you guys with this. So, questions to kind of go back, your organization asks, like, what are your requirements to build a product in cloud? Do you have governance that protects you financially? Are you letting like a new engineer that starts tomorrow have access to an account and they can build whatever? How are you catching if there's a 5K mistake? Who is responsible both technically and financially for a product? Like I said before, what happens if technically an issue arises or security issue arises? What happens if financially an issue arises? Do you have that person that's accountable? How good are your estimates? Are you going back and looking at, we did this estimate 3 months ago, now we're operational. Are we in the 2 to 5% range? Where did we go wrong? Those are really good retrospects to have. And if you haven't done that estimate up front, it's very hard to catch how accurate you are on that stuff. And then what are you doing to prioritize optimization activities with your engineering teams? You'll constantly hear them that they have other priorities. So, those are kind of questions I think to take back to your organization and figure out what you have now and what you can work on building out to protect yourself a little bit more financially. And with that, I think I'm going to toss it back over unless anybody has any questions.
Well, actually, that was great. Super.
I talked really fast, so hopefully it's okay.
That's quite all right. That was great. Full of information, very practical. I really took from that the cross-cutting nature of the FinOps team and the number of different stakeholders, technical, management, finance, obviously. But you guys really have to cut right across the business to make sure everyone's aligned in following these best practices.
Yeah, I always say finding that FinOps person is definitely a unicorn person, right? They got to be able to talk to an executive, deal with finance, but you've got to be technical enough to sit with an engineering team and understand data transfer costs. So it is very much a unicorn role.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm saving up. I'm seeing a few questions coming in from the audience, which is fantastic. Keep them coming. I'm saving a few of them up for the kind of Q&A session, fireside chat, but I do just want to bring in David, who asks about teams overrunning their budgets. David asks, what happens if a team overruns their budget, and what happens if they keep way below that budget?
Yeah, I can help kind of answer. So when I talked before, we talked about products. And so if a product is below, they're usually part of a larger team. And so they can kind of offset that and say, okay, at the team level, we've saved on this X product. If they overspend on a product, they may have to go look at their estate and say, well, we've got room. It's okay that we overspent within our team because we saved in this product. So within the team, they're kind of always balancing their product estate a little bit. Now, we've had a case where, maybe that team has several products and they're overspending, and that's a conversation where we have to really dig and figure out why. I mean, not overspending is always bad, right? Maybe we have new customers that came on, and this application that we thought was going to be, $10K a month is now $40K a month, but that's okay because we've won, big contracts, and we've got more customers. And so some of that stuff is going back to finance and saying, we need more budget allocated because of these reasons. And that's a big thing, is you're turning the conversation and you're kind of proactively going to finance and explaining this versus them coming to you and saying, you're overspending. You get to tell the story your way. So I hope that helps. Within the team, we try to manage it, but if the team is overspending, we try to figure out why.
One follow-up question to that before we'll move on, and I appreciate there are other questions coming in that I'm on top of, and I'm storing them up. But in terms of the incentives, then how do you incentivize teams to keep within their budgets? How does that work? Where's the motivation?
Here, no, I'm kidding. It's something we're working on a lot.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was joking that's fear, but no, it's something that we're constantly working on. We do a lot of sharing, like this team was really successful. They cut their spend by this much, like a lot of giving kudos. We write a lot of blogs. We make sure we share that up with the executive teams as well. So I think giving those teams recognition of what they're doing is a big part of it.
Very good. Very good. I'm sure we could discuss these practical considerations all night, but we'll come back to some of the Q&A at the Fireside chat, and in the meantime I see Alad's sharing his screen, and he's ready to talk about understanding, controlling and reducing cloud costs. So I shall hand over to him, and we'll pick up the Q&A in the chat after that. Over to you, Alad.
Thanks. So yep, I'll talk about understanding, controlling and reducing cloud costs. I'm Alad Sage, VP Engineering at Cloudsoft, but this talk isn't about me, it's about cloud costs. So let's jump on. I want to give a definition of FinOps. So here's one. It's the practice of bringing together finance, technology, and business to master the unit economics of the cloud for business advantage. It's also worth noting that FinOps, the name, it's not managed to DevOps. It's all about collaboration and teams working together to maximize business value. So it's a financial operating model. It's about culture, collaboration, and best practices. It's about accountability for that cloud spend within your organization. And it's giving you financial and operational control without sacrificing the other big benefits of the cloud, such as innovation. So Ben already talked through these principles. I think it's no bad thing for me to repeat them on the slide here and call out some things about them as well, because these are really important for thinking about the best practices of cloud financial management. So we've said the word collaboration lots of times. This includes for finance teams working with the application owners who actually incur the costs. Everyone takes the responsibility for their cloud usage. Think about how much things are going to cost. This might sound obvious to some, but developers and architects have often not had this level of detail of their spend, particularly if we're thinking about people who are used to developing on-prem. That leads to cost reporting, making that accessible to everyone and as near real-time as possible. It's surprising how many companies hide that from engineering teams. And again, this is a mindset change. So if we think of a large company who are running on-prem, they wouldn't tell an engineer how much a server cost when they were ordering it from Dell. And their default assumption potentially is to make sure that there's no permissions to access the billing and cost views within AWS or your cloud of choice. So it's definitely a mind shift change to then say, actually, let's share these costs. Let's be open with the whole team about this. Next, decisions are driven by business value. So what is right for the business? And as it's already been said before, but worth repeating, focusing on decreasing costs is not always the right thing to do. Sometimes you've got to think about like time to market or handling growth or whatever is actually going to deliver the most business value to you. Talking about growth, that leads to taking advantage of variable costs. So pay for just what you need. So on-prem, people would provision for peak load. Instead, we can think about auto-scaling if we write our applications to take advantage of that, and if we configure the cloud resources to do that. And then finally, there's the centralized team drives FinOps. So some decisions, such as negotiating enterprise discounts are certainly best handled in a centralized way rather than by individual teams. Similarly, there's some problems and tools that it's just going to be far more efficient to do centrally rather than individual teams all trying to solve these same problems. So what does success look like? What does good look like? Well, lower costs is just a part of it. Understanding and better reporting of costs is also really valuable. It builds trust between the business and finance and application owners as well. It helps to avoid panic attacks when cloud bills arrive. So it's not a surprise because you have these early warnings and you've got better tracking of these costs. When companies try to cut costs without having this collaboration and trust, it often impacts innovation. There's blockers put in rather than ways of dealing with this in a more collaborative way. But faster innovation is one of the biggest benefits of cloud, so we must not sacrifice that. So I want to talk about some more detailed things. Let's talk about cloud bills. So an itemized bill is absolutely huge. If we talked about any fair-sized environment, it's going to be over 1 million rows. Some large enterprises will have billions of rows. You can't just import this into Excel to look at it. And even if you did, it's incredibly cryptic. Like the same resource might be listed multiple times depending upon whether it was eligible for being run partly as a reserved instance, partly in the free tier, and so on. So these bills are complicated. Also, the bill next month is not going to be the same as it was this month. So spend will vary month by month. There's a number of reasons for this. There's architects and developers might make changes that affect the cloud costs. There's also some variable costs in there, such as data transfer costs or things where it's charged per request, or if you've got auto scaling, it's just not going to be the same set of resources running next month as it was this month. It's also really hard to estimate cloud costs in advance. So there's different pricing models for different types of resources. The simple calculators out there usually ignore a lot of the costs. They don't list like all the services available and all the nuances of the different types of these things. They just focus on some of the big obvious things. But some of those nuances can be incredibly expensive. Like data transfer costs can be a big part of these bills. And often these are forgotten about because on-prem, like, yeah, you don't have that as a line item in your bill. It's all just wrapped up in your hosting provider's costs. So it's not like the old days when finance and procurement would approve an infrastructure budget and that was it. So budgets are not enforced for production systems. And if you don't have the proper guards in place and proper reporting, then it could well be a surprise at the end of the month. And that makes forecasting hard. So forecasts will be wrong. And you really don't want the finance team to only find out about big discrepancies when the next bill arrives. Finance teams have fiduciary responsibilities for accounting. They're supposed to get accounts right when they report this to the board, to their shareholders, and therefore we've got to try to minimize the level of surprise that we're talking about here. So back to the principle of embracing the variable pricing of cloud. So this is a big change in mindset. We can talk about it as a negative and a challenge, which the finance teams might well do, but it's also a huge advantage. Like we can cut our costs by embracing that variable pricing, but we need to think about how that changes the organization and change our mindset there. And yeah, as I said, estimating costs is hard, particularly for a new system where you don't have any production load that's been run through it to see how it's actually going to behave. So it's also important that we think about the real costs. So real costs, by that I mean it's not just about your cloud bill, it's about the total cost of ownership. So for example, running with cloud managed services might well increase your bill compared to running everything yourself on VMs, but it will actually decrease your costs because you don't need to worry about all of the training, the maintenance, the upgrades and everything else. So going beyond just the bill and thinking about that total cost of ownership is really important. Next up, we want to measure the business value. So mentioned unit economics before, examples have been given around what if we've got twice as many users this month as we did last month. So our cost might increase by 50%, but that's a good thing. We're actually more efficient than we were before. So if you can think about costs as a cost per user or whatever is appropriate for your application, it's a much better way of thinking about cloud costs than just the number. And finally, think about the effort required to reduce those costs. Is that the right way for your engineer to spend the time? Engineers are all too often bad at thinking about the cost of their own time. So I find it can be useful to give them a heuristic. So like, how much money would this change save you in a year? And how much time is it going to take you to make this change? So would you recoup that amount of effort in that time? And include the time for testing and deploying the change and the risk involved in making that change. And those are really important factors when thinking about how you're actually going to make changes to try to save money. So what about understanding those cloud costs? There's a bunch of tools out there, be it AWS Cost Explorer or tools for the other clouds, third-party things like Cloudability and Cloud Health. These are often aimed at techies who already know AWS, for example. It might well use the terminology of AWS, and a finance person looking at this might well struggle. So often what a finance person wants to look at is the cost allocation. What's the cost of business unit? What's the cost of products? How much does application X actually cost me? So the first big technique to do that is to make use of separate AWS accounts. So put your applications into different AWS accounts under a single consolidated billing account. That also gives massive security benefits. The second big technique that people use is to tag resources, and then you can report costs based on the tags. But some resources cannot be tagged, and there are also some really big costs, such as data transfer, that you only see at the account level rather than at the tagging level. So wherever possible, I like to fall back on those separate AWS accounts, which, like I said, for security reasons, you should be pushing for anyway. A common challenge in this cost allocation is how you deal with shared costs, be that shared services such as VPNs or network connections, or shared platforms, such as you might have a Kubernetes cluster that has lots of applications running on it. And how do you divide up the costs of that Kubernetes cluster in order to do that cost allocation? So let's also think about the charge back and show back. So we talk about cost allocation. If we charge that back, we're saying that we're going to ask the application owners or the budget owners for that particular product to pay those costs, pay those cloud costs. Compare that with showback, where we just show those costs to those product owners, so they can that can influence their behavior, but we're not asking them to actually pay the bill. I've already mentioned cost visibility, so we've talked about making that visible to everyone. We've talked about making that as near real time as possible, so you can see the effects of your changes, and also you can react quickly. Like ideally, we also want everyone to work off the same cost information, but this is harder than it sounds. So when you take into account savings plans and reserved instances, you can end up paying different rates for two resources that seem like they're the same thing. You also might have big upfront costs. So with that reserved instance, you might pay upfront for the next 12 months, and then your bill for the next 12 months is going to look smaller. So if these costs aren't shown in the right way, then teams might make the wrong cost-saving decisions. They might also lose trust in any chargeback or showback that you do, and cause tension between teams. So this cost information is actually a hard problem. Next, detecting spend anomaly is another really important point. Spend can increase fast. We had one customer who came to us after they'd accidentally written a recursive Lambda. So it kept causing itself to be executed again and again, racking up a big bill of thousands of dollars. And it took too long for them to spot that this was running. And this was like a wake-up call that we need to be tracking this closer to real time. So real time is pretty much impossible to do, but closer to real time, so we can find out when these things are happening, and we can react faster. So there are a number of techniques, and for example, in AWS, you can have AWS budgets where you have alerts are set up based on the actual spend and the forecast spend. AWS cost anomaly detection is a relatively new service, so you can set up thresholds there that is service by service telling you if the costs look very different from normal. And there's also third-party tools out there that you can consider. When we're thinking about the costs of the applications, we need to think about their context. So what matters for that application, and what state is it in? So is it a stable state, or are we undergoing rapid innovation? Is this application business critical? Are we expecting big growth? And there's a lot of trade-offs that we need to think about. So for example, do we care more about prioritizing features than we do about cutting costs for this application right now? What are its reliability requirements? So are we overdoing it in terms of the number of availability zones we're running in, or the amount of high availability that we have for this application? And also, what business value is this application really bringing? So there's been too many cases in big enterprise where they've had applications that have been running costing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and it turns out they're hardly being used at all. It's just that they've been running for a very long time. And it requires a review of their business value to identify that. So rather than spending time optimizing that application, actually, could we just turn it off, or at least sunset it and deprecate it and move away from that? So final slide, some concrete things about actually reducing costs. So first of all, focus on the biggest costs and the quickest wins. That obviously means you need to understand your cloud spend. So turn stuff off. It's important to think of it as we're charged for what we leave running, not for what we use in the cloud. Cloud providers will tell you that you pay for what you use, but that's not quite true. So sometimes this stuff is things that has been accidentally left running, so we need to terminate it or delete it. Sometimes it's just that we are leaving it running 24/7 when we don't need it. So a test environment, if we could stop that so it's only running 9 till 5, that would be a quarter of the cost of if we left it running 24/7. Next up, to commit to minimum level of usage. So to buy saving plans or reserved instances. So this can be a low effort way to reduce your bill. But the details of that are a whole other talk, I think. Next up, right sizing. So are the instances you're using appropriately sized, or are they too big? So could you half the size of that instance and also half its cost? Could you look at actually auto scaling out? So instead of running large instances that are going to deal with peak load, could we use smaller instances that auto scale more? Next, switch to managed services. So as I said before, this might sometimes cause your bill to increase slightly, but it will decrease your total cost of ownership. So whether that's moving from a database running on a VM to using Amazon Aurora or RDS, or whether it's switching to application load balancers, there's a whole bunch of options as to what managed services you're going to make use of. Next up, reviewing your application architecture. So again, we need to look for the big bang for buck. How do we reduce for example, data transfer costs? Could we reduce the high availability requirements? And all of this requires a good understanding of that application architecture. So it's important to think about what those small incremental improvements we could make. So a major refactor to try to write it to be a serverless application might save you lots of cost long term, but the amount of effort and time it will take will be big. So yeah, look for that biggest bang for buck. And the last one included there is very, very specific. So if you're on AWS and you're using VMs with volumes attached, then switching from GP2 to GP3 will save you about 20% off your bill, as well as increasing your performance in many cases. So this was announced in reInvent a couple of months ago. So a common phrase used in FinOps is crawl, walk, run. So start off simple and build up your experience. There's been too many cases where folk have made mistakes by trying to do sophisticated things too quickly. For example, buying lots of reserved instances only to find out that they didn't quite get it right or understand how to use them properly. And sometimes it's actually increased their bill rather than decreasing their bill. So yeah, start off small and build from there. There's lots of things that can be done incrementally. There's lots of opportunities to speak to other teams about what their pain points and priorities are, and to find some quick wins to reduce costs and get buy-in, and show that like this focus on cost is actually giving a good return for the business. That's me.
Al, thank you so much. Very dense, the presentation. I mean, not you. Loads of stuff in there, loads of good things. I think we're seeing some themes that I think the panel certainly agrees on. A great mix of very general advice and very general principles and very concrete advice there. So great stuff coming out. Thank you all, panelists. I'm going to pause just for a moment to see if anyone has any Q&A that they're desperate to type into the chat window now. I will return to a question raised by Jason. Jason raised the issue of licensing, and he raised it in the context of license compliance assessments as part of the FinOps kind of assessment process. So I'll direct that question maybe to Ashley. What role does licensing play in the overall costs of certain enterprise workloads, and what does FinOps have to say about that?
Yeah, so certainly when we're doing an estimate and if we have to run something in Oracle, we need to bring the license or, bring a license or buy your own license. We have to include that in our estimates. So we are keeping those in consideration. There's also been a lot of questions around SaaS in general and like, what does FinOps do with SaaS? And I feel like this is evolving. I think it's one of those things where as you get good at cloud spend, people are going to be like, oh, you're good at that. Why don't you also handle the SaaS stuff as well? So we do dip our toes into that a little bit. We're heavily in the marketplace. And so when you're involved in the marketplace, you're also looking at SaaS products. And we have had to use the marketplace strategically to hit our AWS commit. And so we try to work with our procurement teams to say, hey, if you're going to purchase something, let's consider purchasing it in the marketplace instead. And then when it gets bought, it shows up on a bill. How are we going to allocate that back? And so we've definitely dipped our toes in it. But I think we spend most of our time just focusing on cloud cost itself.
Sure. I want to bring Alad in as well, because we work with companies who build their own software. They're not just hosting commercial off-the-shelf software, but they build their own. That's obviously a use case that we've spoken about quite a lot. And there seems to be an increasing drive to reduce proprietary license costs and to embrace a lot of open source. And it seems that cloud providers like AWS are certainly very supportive of that. AWS had quite a famous Amazon Retail, Amazon.com had quite a famous spat with Oracle over the inevitable Oracle license audit. And they made a very public statement that they wanted to get off Oracle altogether, which they have now done. And they make a point of helping other organizations do the same, not just with Oracle, but with proprietary licensed software, full stop. Alad, I wonder if you have any, sorry to shine the spotlight on you, put you on the spot, but are there any trends kind of in the embracing open source and kind of this democratization of technology, avoiding proprietary licenses, that you think is worth calling out?
So I think there certainly are, and there's some good tools out there that allow you to switch between different databases. So like in AWS, there's the database migration service, but it's not easy. It's a major project to switch from running on Oracle or SQL Server to MySQL or whatever. So yeah, the long-term cost savings can certainly be worth it for some people, and we're definitely dealing with customers who have done that. The other one is around operating system licenses, and so yeah, we work with a number of people who switch from running .NET on Windows machines to actually switching to .NET Core that can run in containers. So there's a lot of scope for saving on licenses costs for the actual, but I think that a lot of organizations, that's a very long-term thing. License compliance is always going to be an issue. There are a number of tools in the cloud providers, be that AWS or Azure, that allow you to help track license usage. Yeah, how much that fits into FinOps, like I think it is a centralized problem. Like FinOps works very closely with the Cloud Center of Excellence, if that's what you're calling it within your organization. So yeah, trying to come up with a strategy as to how you're going to make sure you are compliant and tracking licensed software properly is certainly an important thing of which tooling are you using and how you actually dealing with your tracking those resources.
Mute button. I'm seeing some other audience questions coming in. I do also want to get to the fireside chat, but one of the questions I noticed coming in earlier, this is maybe one for Ben. David was asking specifically about Sky, but you may want to answer more generally, Ben. It's about KPIs around cost. How do you select KPIs that relate to cost?
Yeah, so I would answer that by saying what matters to your business, right? So I can tell you that one of the things that I'm focused in on a metric is, because we're a streaming company as well, we provide a huge amount of over-the-top media through the internet. So we look at cost per concurrent stream, right? So we say, well, on Wednesday, whatever, how many streams, what was a concurrent stream count? How much that cost us per each one of those? And did we do better than we did 6 months ago or 3 months ago? Because that's our core business. That's what we do, right? Your mileage may vary. There is actually a huge number of different KPIs that have been listed out as examples on the FinOps Foundation GitHub. So yeah, you can, there you go. Ashley's just provided the link to it. There we go. That's almost like we planned that. Yeah, there's a whole load of KPIs out there which you can go and look through and use those as a starter for 10 for your business.
Excellent resource. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm not ignoring these other questions that are coming in, but I will pepper them throughout the fireside chat, which I think we should turn to now. That was a fascinating, from my perspective, certainly, fascinating range of experiences that the panel has shared. A lot of overlap, and yet some clearly unique vantage points that you're each coming from. So I think initially, let's talk about how much consensus there is, not just among the panel members, but across the industry as a whole. How is FinOps being received, and what is the kind of emerging consensus around best practices for cost management? Well, start with you, Ashley.
Yeah, so I definitely think there's some consensus being built. I think you've talked about it already, right? Like we've seen this explosion of cloud spend. And so this is being noticed by CFOs, and they're starting to hold CTOs and CIOs accountable for this, right? And so there's been this this kind of shakedown of understanding what we're spending. I think, each organization may take a different approach and maybe have different maturity, but those FinOps principles, those should and absolutely be consistent across every organization, whether you're small, large, multi-cloud, single cloud. So I feel like the principles are the consistency, and then there's also on the foundation some core competencies that really break down the tasks of what people do. So I think those are very common, but maybe the way it's approached and maturity is going to change.
Ben, what's your take?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the things I've seen as well is that there is a slow realization that this is not just an engineering problem. And there's a slow realization also that this is not a one and done, set and forget. Yeah, I've done FinOps now. What's next, right? This is an ongoing adoption of a different culture and a different way of looking at things that is necessary in order to understand the full situation you're in, right? But it is a slow burn. It's not something you can do quickly, and it's not just an engineering problem.
Wholeheartedly agree. Top that, Alad.
By agreeing, yeah, there is good consensus, but there's also so many people out there, right? So I think FinOps Foundation is got what a few thousand practitioners representing many different companies who have joined, but that's still a tiny number of the companies who are using cloud. There's still so many people who have never heard of FinOps, and when they hear the name, think it's something to do with fintech. if we look at what AWS well architected has done, they revamped their cost optimization pillar. They included lots of stuff like AWS collaborate with the FinOps Foundation and contribute. There are lots of ideas that are incorporated into that, not necessarily calling out it as the name FinOps particularly. So I think there is a lot of consensus around some of these best practices, but there's also a lot of people who have been doing this stuff for years independently and using completely different terminology.
Yeah, very well put. I think this is a nice opportunity to introduce a question from Jason around. We've mentioned a lot of AWS on this, and Ben, you've talked about GCP, and we've talked about the big three, but there are other clouds available. And Jason asks a question about applying FinOps activities to IBM Cloud and Oracle Cloud specifically, where from Jason's perspective, the cost management and kind of control features are some way behind. What do the FinOps principles have to say in these rather more technically lagging cloud provider environments? Ashley, any experience there?
Yeah, we definitely have Azure, GCP, and AWS. We have IBM Cloud as well. We haven't dipped our toes in too much, but we've got some of the core competencies. Like we obviously need to forecast what spend is. We need to figure out who's accountable for it. So we've just kind of dipped our toes into it. I think you're right. They haven't been building out the same like type of optimization tooling. They're not well integrated into some of the third-party SaaS tooling. So for us, our estate is just so much bigger and those other vendors that we focus time there, but I don't see a reason why you couldn't apply some of the same principles.
Is it necessary to roll your own tools where the cloud provider doesn't provide them? What's your take, Alad?
So I think there's a lot of the best practices are cross-cutting across all the different clouds because it's about culture, it's about collaboration and so on. Other specific things like if you want to have as near real-time as possible reporting, then yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the IBM and Oracle access to billing information. Can you really get that within a few hours of the usage, or do you need to wait until closer to the end of the month? Like if you don't have that real-time view, it really hampers what you can do to put checks in and get that fast response, fast feedback loops.
I don't want to deny Ben the chance to jump in, but don't feel obliged.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing really to add to that. I've not personally worked with those cloud platforms, so I wouldn't know the pain of dealing with those. So yeah,
lucky man. I think it's interesting that we've talked about specific services, and some of those services are helping with the surfacing of cost information, and some of those services are kind of on the feedback side, how we can actually actively reduce costs. I think interesting. Ashley very quickly ran through three. You mentioned managed services, you mentioned spot instances, and you mentioned what was the other one? Serverless technologies, and these are all wonderful tools to have available to us in the toolkit if your workload supports it and if you're brave enough. I think embracing spot instances is something that people embark upon with a certain amount of trepidation, particularly coming from that mindset of servers are pets rather than cattle.
Well, I just want to add to that too, like our FinOps, we're not going to be like expertise on how to do spot and how to implement that. That's certainly something we expect the engineers to do. But what we can do is bring in experts, right? We can talk to our Amazon TAMs and say, hey, we want to have some education training on spot. We've got a workload that might be possible. Can you come in and take a look? Or we even say, we know this team in Pearson that did it really well. Let's get them to pair together with this team. So I think also don't be so concerned that FinOps job is to do it all. Like we really are there to help like with that collaboration and bring those relationships together. I wouldn't call myself as a spot expert.
Sure. Grand. We've talked about cost reduction, and we've also said that FinOps isn't just about reducing costs, and actually cloud adoption itself shouldn't be about reducing costs. We're all nodding here, but some of our customers or some of the people we talk to about cloud adoption, they still seem to have this mindset that the main reason to go to cloud is to cut costs. Alad, what should we be saying to people who have this preconception?
So cloud cloud can reduce costs, but it's certainly not a given. I think if you treat a cloud adoption as an IT project, or worse, if you treat the cloud just like another data center, then actually it's more likely that costs will go up. So I think it's more important to focus on the huge business benefits of the cloud, like focus on the that you can experiment faster, you can go to market faster, you can stop doing all that undifferentiated heavy lifting and instead focus on what's going to deliver business value in your actual applications. Those selling points to me are so much more important, particularly if you think about like the total cost to the company of your engineering teams and of delayed projects and failed projects. Saying that, like if you use the cloud in the best way, then it will be cheaper. But often when we're talking to people who have legacy applications, they've been written in particular ways, and it can be hard to migrate that to the cloud and follow all those best practices. Like, is it written in a way that can auto scale? So incremental steps to improve that and cut costs, certainly possible. Making use of, say, savings plans and so on, rather than just paying for everything on demand, will cut costs. But we come across so many people who are still on demand pricing. So there's a lot of things that can be done, but it's not the driver for moving to the cloud.
Ashley, I'm sure you have some examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of many things, right? Like, and that's why the well-architected framework has multiple elements to it. We've moved something and we've cut 60% of costs successfully. We've moved something and we've drove up costs by 20%, but it was still a good move to make. So you just have to do the analysis and see what the return on investment is. You've got to take into consideration labor, like maybe you moved over to RDS and it's a managed service, and you can auto shut things down with scripts instead of having a DBA do that. So bigger picture than just costs, but if done right, it certainly can help save a lot of money.
Very good. Very good. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll quote an ex-colleague of mine, ex-leadership colleague of mine, who's once said, think of your worst year budget in cloud, think of your worst nightmare, and then multiply it by 5, and that's a possibility of ceiling that you could possibly hit, right? Cloud can save money, and I've seen it happen, but cloud can also spiral with fairly impressive speed, and as fast as you can innovate and as fast as you can build, you can spend, right? So it's about kind of understanding that the pace of innovation, the pace of engineering and expansion comes with the similar pace of spending expansion. So really it's about the appetite for the business and how much do you want from it, right? How much do you want to build and how quickly do you want to build, and be aware of the fact that the spend line will equally map that. Yeah.
Yes.
So I just add to that, like, so I think that can come across as more scary than it needs to be, though. Although that can certainly happen, it reminds me a bit of the conversations about, is the cloud secure, from the olden days, and it can be more secure than on-prem. But if you don't follow best practices, yeah, of course you can open up your VMs to the world very, very easily with just a few clicks. But there are principles and best practices from the FinOps Foundation and from well-architected reviews and everything else. And if we're following those practices, like, you can innovate while keeping costs down. It just requires pay attention to it and know what you're doing.
Yeah. Again, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. Spider-Man.
Indeed, yes. And yeah, I view the cloud service platforms, the cloud platforms, as being, well, in some days I view it like a sweet shop. I'm just looking at the window of all these services that we can play with because I'm an engineer. But I also view it as like a toolkit, a very vast, very powerful toolkit, containing everything from, at one end of the scale, a bucket and spade, and at the other end you've got a JCB. Vastly different costs, and one of those services is lethal, and it doesn't come with any protective equipment or even a user manual in a lot of cases. So, yeah, you need to know how to wield these tools. Good stuff. A question about enterprises, and we often talk about enterprises as if they're somehow dysfunctional by virtue of being a certain size or of a certain mindset. Why? I'm not saying that they are, by the way, but why do we have so many stories of enterprises struggling with cloud costs? I'll start with you this time, Ben.
I guess you could draw an analogy to sailing, right? It's much quicker to turn a rowboat than it is to turn an oil tanker. And at the end of the day, if you've got a large organization with many moving parts and many personalities and teams and goals and priorities involved, then being able to shift direction or adopt culture and change culture is going to take time and going to be hard to do potentially. So yeah, whereas a smaller, like I guess like a 20-person startup or something, you can get everybody in one room and say, we're going to do the thing, we've done the thing, that's it. Whereas getting the larger organization is harder. I guess also because of the complexity of the infrastructure that's going to be moving over as well, there's going to be a lot of difficulty in understanding how that hangs together, especially if it's grown on-prem over a long period of time, and getting that in place in cloud. So that's a lot to wrap your head around.
Absolutely. Ashley?
Yeah, I would just kind of agree with all that and say, sometimes I'm a little envious of, someone just starting out with FinOps or a smaller team, because you can kind of take these lesson learns and apply them. And like, Ben was saying, you maybe only have a room of 20 engineers versus we're talking 400 engineers trying to get them to change the mindset of cost, right? And so I think the scale, there's, often there can be red tape, like this is how we've always done procurement. And you've got to kind of break down that silo a little bit and retrain the mind, kind of retraining finance as well. Like it's not set a budget for cloud, December for the whole next year, and we're going to stick to that. It's retraining that we're doing a iterative forecasting and like thoughts like that. And just more people, I think, involved adds to the complexity often.
Yeah, agreed. I think companies, organizations are successful because of some of these processes that have helped them build and grow and keep control of on-prem costs. It's very difficult to now tell them to give up that security blanket that has actually got them where they are today. But hey, what do you think, Alad?
Yeah, agreed. I think that it's those established processes, they're there for a reason. They're there for governance and compliance. And because without them, like when you're talking about, many millions or billions of spend across your entire company, like, yeah, you need these checks and balances in place. So although we can say, yeah, you need a mindset shift, you still need checks and balances and gates and everything else. So we need to make sure that we are adjusting those processes in a way that we get buy-in for. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard to make sure that the finance teams across these large organizations are going to be happy with that, particularly when far too often it's just viewed as an IT project.
Yes, a recurring theme there, I think. At Cloudsoft, we give consultancy and advice to companies, big and small. Quite often, I find when a customer asks you a question, the answer is very often, it depends. It depends. They ask a general question and they want a specific answer. And it depends. So there's always a context in which things sit. And as unsatisfying as it is to tell a customer, well, the answer depends, it's often true. And we've been talking about, FinOps adoption in the context of the companies where we've worked or the companies where we've advised or the people that we've trained. But how contextual is the advice that we have to give? I mean, Ben, you're a FinOps trainer. You've spoken to, I assume, thousands of people about FinOps from a variety of backgrounds. How contextualized does the advice need to be?
Well, yeah, this is the problem, right? This is the fundamental issue, is that because of the uniqueness of everybody's problem statement, situation, engineering approaches, business structure, all these things, then it's very difficult to be very prescriptive about what people should do to solve a problem. But what I try to do is to frame thought experiments. I try to provide things to say, how do you think? How do you think your organization or your job is going to change as a result of this new thing occurring? And how are you going to overcome that within the bounds of your current abilities in your organization, right? And those are conversations. It's more sort of, rather than telling someone how to do it, it's triggering the beginning of the conversations that then can be explored internally. So yeah, I guess it's a long way of saying it depends. But yeah, effectively, you need to sort of guide the direction for the investigation, for the work to go on.
Ashley, I mean, you've stood here and spoken to us about your FinOps initiatives at Pearson. How unique is Pearson in the FinOps space, do you think?
I think our complexity and size makes us a little bit unique. I've talked about kind of our account structure and how many we have, and we are multi-cloud. That obviously adds to the complexity as well. But I think, what we've learned is to kind of fail fast. Try something, doesn't work, move on from it. We've changed our approach with engineers. Like, we can't just throw, here's a bunch of these cost optimizations, go work on them and tell us when you're done, right? We've changed that approach to say, we're going to sit down with you, we're going to build a business case. Maybe you can't do this in 6 months, we'll circle back to you. Can you explain why you need to run this? So we've really changed our tone in the way that we work with teams. And I don't know if that's unique to Pearson, but I think what's unique to us is we maybe have been doing it a little bit longer. Like, we've been doing FinOps for, roughly 4 years, 2 years with the official title, right? And so we've had a chance to try something again, redo it. And some places we've gotten really strong in. Like, I think we're really good at our budget alerts. We're really good at forecasting now. But there's a lot of areas that we have a lot of gaps in, a lot of our automation. We're still missing the gaps in some of the accountability. And like we just talked about earlier, like, okay, so what? I overspent. Like, how do we keep people accountable? So maybe just complexity in that we've been doing this a little longer than most right now.
Yeah, I'm really hearing a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels with DevOps, and it's not just in the name, but this cutting across teams, iteration, and not being afraid of failing. Learning from mistakes and getting those feedback loops as tight as possible. It really feels like we're using those same lessons that we learned. Alad, kind of on the same contextualization of FinOps, how would the advice, the kind of practices that we've been talking about, how well does that scale down to a small company?
So the need for collaboration and the need for near real-time views and everything else is still very, very appropriate. There are other aspects, like when you start talking about a centralized team, it's like, well, in a small company, you're not going to have somebody whose sole job is FinOps. You're going to have hopefully somebody who's championing it and is taking more interest than others in, like, what should we do about our say our savings plans and commits and this kind of thing. What tools should we be making use of in order to be keeping track of cloud spends? Like, I think it's even more important for small companies to not accidentally let cloud spend get out of control. Because like, if they spend too much, that can completely destroy their budgets. Whereas a large company could swallow some, accidentally leaving a bunch of things running. They might not even notice that their bill is increased by 100,000 one month because it's dwarfed by other things if they don't have good checks and balances in place. So I think it's just the way it's being applied is very, very different. So it's not just a case of, like, let's read a book or go to a talk and hear about how somebody else is doing it and apply the same thing in my company. It's about understanding why those things are being done, and therefore, how do I get those same benefits within my organization?
So with just a few minutes to go before the past mark, I'll lob in one final question, which I think follows on quite nicely. Ashley, how do we get started? What are the first steps, whether we're building a FinOps team or whether we have a passionate advocate for FinOps in a smaller company? How do we get off the starting line?
Yeah, so I certainly think you need executive buy-in. You need someone at the leadership to understand that this is needed, right? That if we're going to keep building in the cloud or start in the cloud, that we've got to have some visibility into financial spending. And we've got to have this partnership set up with a team that is working with the engineers and working with the finance team. So, start by building the case, right? There's some really good material on the FinOps Foundation about how to go through that and kind of request that your VP or executive take that up. And I would say second to that is figure out what your easy wins are. There are some basic things that you can do, shutting servers off, cleaning up S3 buckets, like figure out what that top 10 list is and start attacking it. Also, where are you at today? What is your current state? Get those metrics, get those time series data metrics, whether you put them in a spreadsheet, whatever it is, do your easy wins, document how that impacted that, and start building the case of why this is so important to do. And then you'll get sponsored. You'll get more buy-in as you do those easy wins and get others to come along the journey with you.
That's cool. You build a flywheel, right? Yeah. Alad, do you want to opine?
Completely agree with that. The executive buy-in and everything else, definitely. I think talking to the teams about where their pain points are is really important for building that rapport. Like often the finance teams and the engineering teams are using very, very different language and potentially not communicating properly. So being that bridge to try to broker those conversations, like Corey Quinn says that when he goes in, he's sometimes a marriage counselor between these different teams. So also making costs more visible. So actually like looking to solve that problem of how do you explain those cloud costs and that cost allocation to the finance team? How do you make sure that the application teams have visibility of how much their application is costing? Like, do they already have access? Do they actually look at it? Do they understand their bill? And then think about what those priorities will be. I think it's getting that executive buy-in, though. It's interesting that when you look at where does the FinOps team sit in a lot of different organizations, it varies a lot. Like, is it underneath the CFO? Is it underneath the CTO? Is it underneath the CIO? And I think that's because it's a case of who decided that this was a problem worth tackling, and that's where the team then ends up being. And that's really telling in terms of like, yeah, we need to figure out that this is a problem and that we're going to address it, and we're going to start actually trying to get that collaboration going across the company.
Yes, very good. I'll give you the last word, Ben, in the absence of any more questions coming in.
Yeah, thanks. So I couldn't agree more with everything people have said about prioritization and exec buy-in. It's absolutely critical, because otherwise you're going to have people saying, I'm too busy doing other more important things, right? So you have to have that buy-in. The other thing I would say is to start small, right? To start with a small team of people and get them living those values and operating the way that they need to be operating on that. I mean, the State of FinOps survey that came out recently indicated that getting engineers to take action was one of the hardest things that the organizations were having to deal with. So work on that, right? Work on helping the engineers to be prioritized, to do the right things, to free them up to do that, right? And to make sure they know why, right? And start with the why of why we're doing this and provide that education.
Excellent. Make it easy to do the right things. Wonderful. Grand. Just checking the chat window. I'm not seeing any burning questions coming in from the floor, as it were. I will take one last opportunity to share the contact information, our LinkedIn and our Twitter feeds. And I just want to thank the panelists, Ben and Ashley and Alan. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences and your accumulated wisdom in this FinOps space. It's lovely to see this new field kind of burgeoning with great ways of working and with ways to break out of old habits that I think have held us back and kind of hobbled our customers in the past. So thank you for sharing so willingly and so frankly your experience of the space. And thanks too for all the attendees who've come along and given up a chunk of their Thursday evening to participate, to listen, and to raise some questions as well. So without further ado, I will express my own appreciation to you all. Thank you. And I'll wish you well, and watch this space for information on the next Cloud Pathway number 9. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, everybody.